Welcome back to the Paperback Podcast, and today we're talking about 1984 by George Orwell. But I'm not going to be talking just about this book. I'm going to be comparing it with a book that I've already talked about, which is Brave New World. I saw in the beginning of this book where they talk, about the book, and there's oh, it's so good, they have these little reviews from people, and they kept talking about 1984. They're like, well, 1984 wasn't really you didn't really get to see it really happen in today's world, but Brave New World was so much more accurate, and I wanted to see if that was true. So I picked up 1984 from my mom's big ass library that she has in this house, and I decided to start reading it. And I came to the conclusion that it depicts our future just as much as Brave New World does, but in a bit of a more subtle way, and I'll get into that later. But first, what's it about, So, 1984 is a dystopian novel written by George Orwell, and it's about a society that is strictly controlled by an oppressive regime, and it monitors every citizen, their citizens' every movement and action and facial expression, and heavily uses propaganda. So the government is called the party, and the leader is called Big Brother. So yeah, I mean, you never really get to meet Big Brother. It's just they never really reveal who that is. It's just kind of like this figure that I guess they kind of made up to kind of scare people into, to be able to oppress them more. So the main character is Winston Smith, and he feels a bit out of place, and he wants to seek answers about how the world was before the revolution, what they call the revolution, which I guess is just before this party controlled the world. So he seeks answers, and he goes to this part of the society that was outcast called the proles, and he goes to find answers, but he doesn't find any answers. But while he's on this quest, he meets Julia and falls in love with her, and she also feels out of place in the society, so they end up bonding over that, and they talk about that and everything. So spoiler alert, I'm gonna be talking about a lot of spoilers in this video, so warning, spoiler, if you don't want to hear any spoilers about this book, don't watch. The spoiler is important to the video because I have to compare it with Brave New World, and I have to compare the endings, which includes spoilers, So, sorry, but yeah. So what happens is that Winston ends up getting thrown in jail because he's caught. And he is tortured until he completely goes against his own beliefs. They use these crazy techniques to literally change his thoughts and his beliefs. So he ends up, in jail, and he ends up being absorbed back into society. So that's basically just a short summary of the book, of basically what happens, right? What I found really interesting is that the slogan of the party is "War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength," So it's a lot of they're opposites, but they're saying that, I don't know, war is peace. So what I found really interesting, that even if we don't directly see this, these slogans are a part of our society today. So maybe not as obvious, but kind of a bit more subtle. Let's talk about the first one, War is Peace. In the book, the party and their area, so the country, I guess you could say, which is Oceania, I don't know how to pronounce that, is at war with either Eurasia or East Asia. It switches, I don't know. That's also part of the book. And they're constantly at war. And they're saying that war is peace, so that by constantly fighting these people, eventually they'll, have peace and stuff. Isn't that also true today? Aren't we also not just, sending more weapons to countries so they can fight other countries, and we're just creating more war because we think that that's what creates peace. But if we're using bombs to create peace, isn't that just counterproductive. Like, that doesn't make any sense, you know. That's why I found also really interesting. Okay, freedom is slavery. Now, I think this is a big one. I think you kind of have to really think about this one, so I'm going to be explaining it as best as I can. But basically, if you think about it, the way that we are told that we have to work, right? We have to go into the workplace, we have to work for a very long time. And I feel like the way that the work life is built is that it has that mentality that freedom is slavery. So you have to be a slave to the system and a slave to the people that you're working for to be able to be free, to have money, you know? So you have to work for people, you have to like listen to your boss's orders, and you have to be a slave to this kind of system in order to have money and to be free. So I found that very interesting because I was like thinking about that. I was like, that's, you know, pretty true. So last slogan is ignorance is strength. And I feel like this is another big one. I feel like this has become very true in the past couple of years, actually, with COVID and everything. And I don't want to sound all Republican, God bless America, but like, just hear me out on this. Okay. Ignorance is strength. Trust the government, they know what they're doing. Trust health experts, they know what they're doing. Why do we immediately trust these people, right? Why do we immediately trust the government? Why do we immediately trust health experts? We're told to trust the government, to trust health experts, but should we really? I mean, like, why? Why should we completely ignore and just support and think that they're doing what is best for us when we're not completely sure, you know? I feel like we should be more cautious when it comes to that kind of stuff. I don't think we should immediately trust the government. We shouldn't. Absolutely not. I don't think we should immediately trust the so-called health experts, because how can you trust someone that you don't really even know? I feel like you should always think for yourself and research for yourself, and never become part of this ignorance is strength, because the whole ignorance is strength thing is strength for the government and for the people that want to have control over you. That's the whole thing. If you ignore everything and don't do your own research and don't think for yourself, then that gives a lot of power to the government and to people who want to control you. So that's why I think it's really important that we don't do that. I think it's important that everyone does research for themselves and doesn't immediately trust the people who are in power. So I think that because these slogans are so true even in our own world, the fact that people say that 1984 never really came to reality, I don't think that's true. I think it has. It's just not as obvious. I think the parts of like I think this is really extreme. I mean, like, there's like these things called telescreens in every house, you know, and they're like always there's like a voice and like watching you, and if you do something wrong, they're like number 281, like go back to your bed or something, you know, like that's really extreme. I don't think that's never happened, and I don't think that's ever going to happen. But it is kind of a little bit like, if you think about like the Alexa devices, that's scary. Like, why do you have that in your house? It's constantly listening to you. That is scary. But it's not like speaking to you, you know, but it is still listening to you. So I think it is a bit more extreme in this book, but it's not that far off, you know, and especially these slogans are extremely accurate to our current reality. So another point is, I didn't really understand what the point of the ending of the book was. At the end, Winston Smith is just kind of absorbed back into the society. He loves Big Brother at the end. That's what he said. At the end of the book, it says, he had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. I didn't really understand that ending, right? I was like, what is the point of this? So I did some research about what the ending means, and there are actually multiple like interpretations. So two of them are that the party totally wins, that the party will always win, you know, and the second is that it's just hopelessness, you know, complete like loss of control, like that you're not in control. But the one that made the most sense to me is that this is a warning about the dangers of totalitarianism. And I feel like that makes a lot of sense because when I think of this book being a warning about the danger of totalitarianism, the ending makes a lot more sense to me because it ends in a way that's like, um, if we have a totalitarian society, the government will always win. The totalitarian society will, like, the government will always win, and I think that's one of the better interpretations of the book. I feel like that's the one that makes most sense. So, what I realized while I was reading this book is that there are a lot of parallels with Brave New World, this book. I already talked about this book. If you haven't watched that or listened to the episode, um, I recommend it because I mean, I'm gonna be kind of summarizing what happens in this book. I mean, like, it's kind of the same. Um, but I recommend watching the video. Uh, yeah. But if you haven't, it's not really that big of a deal. Like, you can still understand this. So, in general, a comparison, right? So, both of them are dystopian novels that depict the possible outcomes of totalitarianism, social control, and the impact of technology. But the only real thing, like, one of the biggest things that's different is their visions of the dystopian world. So, like, the same topics and the same problems, but a little different. And, like, that small difference is actually huge. So in Brave New World, for example, first point is that the government exercises control through psychological conditioning and uses pleasure, like drugs, to distract citizens. But in 1984, the government exercises control through an oppressive regime, extreme control and surveillance, fear and propaganda. Like, it enforces conformity through fear. It's like the way that the government controls their citizens is different, but they're still controlling their citizens through technology. Technology is a big part in both of these dystopian societies. The parts where they're actually very similar is that they both have main characters who secretly rebel against the society. Brave New World, you have Bernard Marx, and in 1984 you have Julia and Winston Smith. So those are the main characters who secretly feel out of place. And another thing is that both of these main characters, they find comfort in a part of society that has been outcast. So in Brave New World, it is the savages and the savage reservation. And in 1984, it's the proles, which are basically just the people who survived the revolution. So, last point that's also very similar is that in the end, both are absorbed into the society's system again. So there's similar endings for the main characters, but the only thing that's different in Brave New World, again, a spoiler, is that at the end, a person who's not a main character, which is John, the savage, he ends up like unaliving himself. So there is a bit of a difference in the endings, but overall the ending for the main characters aren't that different. Both of them get sucked back into the society and they end up not rebelling anymore. So another difference is how technology is used in both these societies. So in Brave New World, technology is used to create a pleasure-oriented society. They create a drug that immediately makes you feel a lot better. They focus a lot on hedonism, so instant pleasure and any sort of activities that can distract their citizens and make them focus only on on those kind of experiences. But in 1984, technology is used only to control their citizens, like completely control, like surveil them, monitor them, everything. I mean, they're just completely monitored and controlled all the time. The only time that you're really safe is when you're sleeping. Even then, they can still watch you while you're sleeping. You might say something in your sleep, and then you end up getting tortured for years. Whoops. Shouldn't have sleep talk, your fault. But, like, yeah, so in general, the novels are not at all that different, but the way the government is and the impact of the government's control is different. So in Brave New World, you have a society that only focuses on pleasure, doesn't do anything that's like deep, no poetry, there's no love, there's no family or anything like that. It's all just sex and drugs. But in 1984, you create a very patriotic and very controlled society that also doesn't feel any emotions like love. They feel hatred and fear. They feel love when they beat the other country in the war. Both the societies, you don't have this love stuff. You don't have anything that's like deep. In 1984, it's all extremely political, but in Brave New World, it's more like creating a society that's completely focused on hedonism. Overall, I found that both books were so interesting and eye opening. It's actually insane. Like with I can't really I don't I like both of them the same amount, to be honest. But yeah. I like both of them. They're both really good. I wouldn't be able to choose my favorite, to be honest. Um like even though I like both of them like a lot, I would have to give Brave New World 4 out of 5 stars because, like I said in the other video, what happens to Bernard Marx is, well, he gets sucked back into society, but I found it very strange because that didn't happen at the end. It's like they introduced a main character, talked about him for 90% of the book, and then they just switched him out for this other guy, and I didn't really like that. Um, so I would have to give Brave New World 4 out of 5 stars just for that. But I I like both of them an equal amount. Like I wouldn't be able to choose my favorite. They're both really good. So I do highly recommend them if you're into, dystopian stuff. I mean, these are like classics, so like I do recommend them. They're classics for a reason. They're pretty good. I've always wanted to read 1984, so I'm glad I could finally do that. Um but again, I wouldn't recommend this if you're new to reading. These are hard, man. These are hard to these both took me like I spent like a month and a half trying to read Brave New World, and then I spent another month trying to read 1984. So it took me quite a while, but it was worth it. It was very interesting. I would definitely recommend. I think it can really change your perspective on stuff. It can really teach you some new things, and yeah. So yeah, overall, pretty good books. Yeah. This is a way more organized podcast than my other ones because I actually have like long list of like notes. Like I even did a little what do you call it? I created a little like table thing. So yeah. So I had a really long list of notes. I think it was a lot more organized this time because of that. I hope you enjoyed the episode of the paperback pep per per what the fuck? I've never struggled that much to say the name of this podcast. Jesus. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Paperback Podcast. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.